Thank you, everybody, for coming this evening. We are very, very lucky to have Dr. Anna Wilkinson with us this evening. Dr. Anna Wilkinson is a policy advisor for PeTA UK, working to end the use of animals in science. She is a policy expert with over 15 years' experience at the intersection of ethics, science, and medicine. She has experience leading on legislative and regulatory reform, the development of regulatory guidance, and ethical analysis of emerging biotechnologies. Her work has involved stakeholder engagement, research, policy analysis, and communication of complex policy issues to government, parliament, and regulatory bodies. She holds a doctorate in moral philosophy from the University of Sheffield. Anna's work at PeTA involves promoting PeTA's research modernisation deal, which outlines a 6-step strategy for ending experiments on animals with parliamentarians and policymakers in the context of the UK strategy to replace animals in science. Thank you very, very much for coming.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. So I'll just get started. Thank you for introducing me, Alan. Yeah, it's very nice to be invited, so thank you for that. So yes, as Alan said, I work for PeTA and my role sits within the science team, and I'm going to talk to you about the work that we do at PeTA on ending animal testing. Okay, next slide. Hold on, there we go. Okay, so this is just a bit more detail. It's a quick overview of what I'm going to cover this evening. I'll start by saying a bit about PeTA in general and our work to end animal testing. Then I'm going to say a bit about the scientific problems with research using animals and the implications that this has for disease research and the impact on human medicine. And then I'm going to talk about PeTA UK's policy work in the field, and I'm going to say a bit about getting into animal advocacy work more generally. Okay, so let's start with PeTA. So who we are, what we do, and our stance on animal testing. So PeTA US was established in 1980, so a long time ago. There are now, I think, 10 PeTA entities around the world, including PeTA UK. PeTA works to end all forms of animal exploitation. So that's not just animal testing, that's addressing exploitation in food systems, in clothing, entertainment, as well as in science, where I work. And underpinning all of this is our mission statement, which I've got on the slide there, and that drives all our work, and that sits underneath our whole approach to ending animal exploitation. PeTA is probably best known, I would say, for quite bold campaigns and undercover investigations, that kind of thing, and that's definitely what I associated PeTA with before I joined. However, I think it's less well known that at the heart of the work that we do is really strong commitment to evidence and to science. PeTA UK has a network of scientists and policy experts with a very wide variety of expertise, actually. So ecotoxicology, behavioural science, medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and epidemiology, and more than that. We really have a varied set of expertise. And our work to end animal experiments is very much grounded in that scientific expertise through research, funding, and policy advocacy. We work with scientists, regulators, universities, industry, and governments to advocate for approaches to research and testing that are not only more ethical, but also more species relevant, reliable, and over the long term, better for human health. And that scientific background is really important for the work that we do with government, and that brings me to my own background and how I ended up working at PeTA. So it's a bit about me. Alan's already mentioned some of this, but I think I'm a bit unusual in my team in that my academic background is not actually in a scientific discipline, but in ethics, and I have a PhD in moral philosophy. Before joining PeTA, I worked on medical ethics and bioethics issues. So I worked at the General Medical Council and the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, both British government regulators. And in those roles, I worked mainly at the intersection of ethics, law, public policy on issues around medical confidentiality and informed consent, end-of-life care, that kind of thing. But I also worked for the Nuffield Council on Bioethics. I don't know if anyone has heard of them, but they're an organisation which examines ethical issues raised by scientific developments. And I worked on an inquiry specifically on the use of genome editing technologies in animals used in farming systems. And on that project, part of my job was to do desk research into scientific evidence on animal sentience and behaviour, the history of how animals have been used in breeding systems, as well as what actually happens to animals within farming systems. And it was during that work that my own views about the status of animals really changed a lot. And I found that engaging seriously with the evidence on animal cognition, suffering, animal welfare, and seeing what those realities meant for animals within food systems, that made it very difficult for me to justify the routine use of animals as tools for human ends. And that was when I became vegan, and I started actively supporting animal charities and more proactively supporting the recognition of animal rights. So then when I later joined PETA, that felt like a natural progression for me. So continuing to work on ethics and science and policy, but in a role where my concerns about the systemic abuse of animals was central to my work. So I feel very lucky to be able to use my experience and skills in this context. So my work at PETA, as I said, this is specifically on ending animal testing. And this is obviously a really important area, causes a huge amount of animal suffering in the UK and around the world. I have the statistic up here on my slide. So in 2024, which is the most recent year for which we have statistics, there were 2.64 million procedures using animals conducted in Great Britain alone, which is really shockingly high number and is associated with really extreme levels of pain, distress, fear, and ultimately death for the animals involved in those procedures. And I don't know, some of you might have seen the recent Animal Aid footage. It came out about a week ago. That was taken in a UK facility of animals being used in toxicity testing. Some of those pictures are really hard to look at. They show dogs, pigs, rabbits, rats, monkeys being physically restrained, forced to inhale toxins, struggling to breathe, having liquids applied to open wounds, and being sort of squeezed into plastic tubes. They're really quite unpleasant and distressing to look at. So that's what we're up against. So as I said, my role is to encourage the UK government, universities, companies to move away from animal testing and to instead develop, validate, use scientific methods which don't involve animals. And that's what we refer to as non-animal methods. And there are two core reasons why we advocate for this. The first one, you won't be surprised to hear, is ethical. This follows on directly from our mission statement. Animals are not ours to experiment on. They are sentient, feeling individuals who value their own lives, and they should not be subjected to the distress and suffering that animal testing causes. And using them as disposable tools in experiments, which involves pain and psychological distress before killing them, that just can't be ethically justified. So that's the first reason. Animal testing is unethical. The second reason, and this is really critical for the work that we do with policymakers, is that research using animals is not good science. It's perhaps not unsurprising. Animals have very different physiologies, different metabolisms, different immune systems, disease pathways. As a result, data generated from research using animals just can't reliably predict how humans will respond to a given drug or a given intervention. And I want to say as well, this isn't just a fringe view. It isn't just PETA that says this. It's increasingly recognised across biomedical research, regulatory science, drug development, as well as with policymakers around the world. And I just want to add a linked point here too, that sort of feeds into the ethical argument against animal testing as well from an economic and patient perspective, because experiments on animals have absorbed billions of pounds of public and private funding over many decades. And despite this research having repeatedly failed to deliver effective treatments and cures for human disease. So that, when you think about it, that represents, it's not just animal suffering, but it's a really profound ethical failure in how we allocate resources and how we attempt to make medical progress. So an example would be stroke. If you consider stroke, it affects more than 900,000 people in the UK, costs more than £7 billion in healthcare related services. There are actually more than 1,000 experimental treatments aimed at protecting brain cells in acute stroke patients being developed in rodents, and not a single one of those is effective in human patients. So that's clearly a huge waste of money and obviously a severe failing for human patients as well. And just before moving on to the next slide, I just want to say that I am going to focus mainly on biomedical research. Unfortunately, animals are used in all manner of experiments, so basic discovery or blue skies research, to neuroscience, to safety assessment, biomedical research and drug development. And for most of this talk, I'm going to talk about the latter, so disease research and biomedical research. So I'm going to say a bit more about why research using animals fails. And as I said earlier, these are very well documented issues. So you can ask me questions about this. There's some sort of technical ideas in here, but I want to try and explain what some of the problems are. First issue I want to talk about is poor study design. And unfortunately, a large proportion of experiments using animals suffer from really basic methodological flaws, so not good science. And these include small sample sizes, lack of randomization, and the failure to use blinding for researchers when treatments are given or results analysed. And blinding, just to explain, because I haven't heard of blinding, that's a method where information about which treatment or drug an animal is receiving, so for example, whether that's a candidate drug or a placebo, where that information is concealed from the person doing the research. And that matters a lot because we know that conscious and unconscious bias can have a really big effect on how outcomes are interpreted. So no blinding is an issue. And in fact, major Oxford meta-analysis found that biased animal studies exaggerate benefits, fail to predict human outcomes, they waste research money, and they shouldn't be used to justify clinical trials. This problem is also reflected in reproducibility. The crisis that we see in reproducibility in preclinical research, that again is a very important principle in science. So essentially, reproducibility, it means that if different researchers do the same experiment, they should get the same results. If they repeat the exact same experiment in the same way, they should get the same outcome. For the experiment to be reproducible and good science. And that's really important because it ensures validity, it establishes trust, and it works to ensure that outcomes aren't just the result of chance or bias. However, investigations have found that between 50 and 89% of preclinical studies, many of which involve animals, can't be reliably reproduced. Reproducibility is a really big problem in research. I put that on the slide so that you can see that sort of clearly. The issue is if results can't be replicated, then they can't form a robust scientific foundation, let alone support development of safe and effective human treatments.
Having like serious intent behind it. To my mind, there's a.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Can you still see my slides? Okay. Okay, I'm going to carry on as though you can still see my slides. Let me know if you
Everything's
can't.
fine.
Okay, good. Okay, so a second really important problem is the unnatural conditions to which animals are unfortunately exposed in laboratories. And these animals, you won't be surprised to hear, are unfortunately kept in highly artificial environments. They're very little resemblance to their natural settings. They're not able to engage in normal behaviours. They experience chronic stress, which crucially can affect their physiology, their neurobiology. That means that problem isn't just a confounding factor. It's not just a minor issue. It directly affects immune responses, metabolism, brain function, and how drugs are processed by the body. And because of this, animals in laboratories are not even good models of their own species in natural conditions. So a mouse in a laboratory doesn't respond to disease or treatment in the same way as a mouse in the wild would. And that on its own raises very serious questions about how reliable experiments using animals can ever be. Okay, but the most important point I want to raise about research using animals, this is a really fundamental problem that I want people to take away, is this third one. Human biology is different to animal biology. So that means that no matter how well an animal experiment is designed, however carefully conducted it is, so think back to the issues around bias and methodological problems, even if you got rid of all of those problems, there would still be fundamental issues with using animals in research, because animals are not the same as human beings. They have fundamental species-specific differences in their genetics, physiology, metabolism, disease mechanisms that can't be engineered away. And these differences affect how diseases develop and, crucially, how interventions do or don't work in the body. Now, on this point, I do think it is important to acknowledge that there are some similarities between humans and animals, and it is important to acknowledge that. However, the differences that exist between them are very, very important in these specific contexts, because when you get down to details, a single receptor on a neuron can affect how the body responds. And these things make a huge difference when looking at the impact of a drug or another intervention. So it really is a key issue. Data from experiments using animals, by definition, can never tell us with certainty how a human being will respond. The best it can do is offer an indirect and often misleading approximation. And that means that even perfectly conducted studies using animals are limited in what they can reveal, because they're seeking to answer questions about the wrong biological systems. The other point that I want to make just before moving on from this point is that at the same time as noting these really fundamental differences physiologically between humans and animals, I do want to say as well that humans and animals are the same in many of the ways that matter. So animals feel pain, they feel pleasure, they are social beings, they care about their offspring and community members. So in those respects, animals and humans are similar, and that's exactly why we need to move away from animal testing as quickly as we can. So now I'm going to talk about the implications of this for medical research. And I think this slide is a really good illustration of what often, unfortunately, happens in research involving animals. Drugs that appear safe and effective in animals very often fail when they reach human trials. And you can see here the cartoon is illustrating the huge numbers of animals and really vast amounts of money that just get ploughed into this system that produces mostly ineffective drugs. And I have this statistic up here. In fact, around 95% of drugs that show promise in preclinical testing ultimately go on to fail in human clinical trials. And animal testing has been identified as a major contributing factor to this failure rate. It's not the whole reason, but it's a major factor. It also creates false confidence in results that just don't translate. And again, I'm just going to say a bit about why that is. So the reason that data from research using animals causes so much waste is because it gives rise to both false negatives and false positives. And I'm just going to explain what those mean. So the drugs that are effective and safe in animals, but not in humans, those are what we'd call false positives. And you can think of a false positive a bit like a false alarm or false hope. It's an indication that something is present but isn't actually there. So an indication that a drug is effective in a human, but it actually isn't. Whereas on the other hand, animal testing also produces false negatives. And you can think of false negatives a bit like a blind spot, I think is quite a good analogy. So that's when something is in fact there, but you don't see it. Animal testing gives rise to these kinds of situations all the time. So but potentially beneficial treatments that could have been effective, life-saving perhaps treatments in humans, they might be abandoned because they never show any promise in animal tests. And there are some really clear examples of that. So penicillin, for instance, kills guinea pigs, despite having a long history of safe use in humans. And ibuprofen is another example that causes kidney failure in cats and dogs, but is obviously very effective as a painkiller in human beings. And we'll never really know how many promising avenues of research have been discarded for this reason. So this isn't just an abstract problem. It has really real consequences for patients, for public trust in science, and for how research funding is spent as well, obviously, as for the lives of millions of animals used in experiments each year. And here's just a couple of examples. It's useful to talk about some specific examples where this shows up. So I've talked about stroke already. Another good example of a specific erroneous assumption about the implications of animal behaviours is the force swim test, which many of you might have heard about. The force swim test has been used for a long time to test drugs for depressive illness. And this test involves experimenters placing mice, rats, guinea pigs, or other animals in inescapable containers filled with water. The animals try to escape by climbing up the sides of the container or even diving underwater, trying to find an exit. And they paddle furiously in an attempt to keep their heads above water, and eventually they start to float. Experimenters in that situation will then time how long it takes for floating to start and then use that as a very crude measure for modelling human depression by assuming that floating is a sign of despair or feeling depressed. And I actually have a short video which I'll play now, just to warn you, this is a piece of footage. It's not graphic as such, but it's quite disturbing, and some people might prefer not to watch it. I'll just leave it on for a few seconds. So you can see the way the mouse responds to this test. This video goes on for several minutes. Eventually the mouse stops swimming and starts to float. While floating was once considered to be indicative of depression, in fact, many scientists now point out that this floating behaviour is actually an adaptive coping behaviour, a learned response to conserve energy, not a sign of depression. I'm just going to turn that off. So the force swim test, that's been widely criticised as an animal test with very serious scientific and ethical concerns, and it should stop immediately. And after a really long campaign, PETA finally persuaded the government that it should no longer be used to model depression, and there are now plans to end licensing by the conclusion of the current parliament, which is obviously a big win for animals. So yeah, on to sepsis, which is another example. PETA at the moment is campaigning very hard to end the use of animals in sepsis research. In the UK, sepsis affects at least 245,000 people a year. 48,000 of those tragically lose their lives to sepsis, and that death rate is larger than breast, bowel and prostate cancer all put together. So it's, I think, quite an under-recognised disease. This is another area where research using animals has failed spectacularly to translate into effective treatments for patients, despite decades of research and enormous investment. And you can see on the slide here, I've said we actually have 150 treatments that are very successful at treating sepsis in mice and rats, but do nothing for human patients. So we don't have any targeted sepsis treatments as a result of all of this animal research that we've done. And I think that's another really striking example of the problem that exists in this kind of research. And again, I think before we move on, it's worth noting that sepsis research is a particularly extreme form of research for animals using these experiments. So just to give you a bit of information about what happens, researchers will induce sepsis in animals by cutting open their abdomens, deliberately puncturing their intestines to allow fecal matter to leak out before then stitching them back up. And animals that have that done to them, they typically endure severe pain, fever, diarrhea, organ failure before ultimately being killed at the end of the research. It really is the stuff of nightmares, which is the reason why we're working to end the use of animals in these contexts. So how can we do better for animals and humans? I want to make the point here briefly that when we talk about replacing animal use in science, it's worth being very clear that this looks different in different research areas. So in some areas, particularly safety assessment and what we call regulatory testing, animals have historically been used in quite routine, standardised ways. So, for example, rabbits might be used to test whether certain chemicals irritate their eyes or irritate their skin. So that's different to academic, basic or discovery research. That's about assessing the safety or toxicity of specific chemical products. And in these cases, there is some very good news that we already have many excellent non-animal methods. And I've pictured a couple of those on the slides there. These are images of organ-on-a-chip systems and in vitro models that are being used more and more. And they're often faster, cheaper, and of course, much, much less cruel. So in these cases, the challenge isn't so much scientific possibility, it's about continuing to develop these non-animal methods, validating them, and then making sure that regulators and companies actually use them. And that transition is already happening internationally. The US recently launched a roadmap to end the use of animals in these regulatory contexts, and the EU, we understand, is shortly to publish a similar roadmap. But it's very important to stress that replacing animal use isn't just a matter of finding one-to-one alternative tests for every current experiment that uses animals. So I'll say a bit more about that now. The situation in basic translational research is a bit different, and the deeper problem here is often the approach to testing itself and not the absence of alternative methods. So in discovery research, many of the questions that scientists ask are built around long-standing research approaches using animals. And the problem is that these approaches often aren't very useful for understanding human biology or disease. And sepsis is a good example of that. Lots of sepsis research relies on research approaches that we know have failed again and again to translate to human patients. So if you think about it, the solution in that case is not to create a non-animal version of a test that we already know doesn't work. What we actually need are better, genuinely human relevant approaches that reflect how disease develops in human beings. So in cases like this, the right response isn't replacement. We actually need to reframe the questions and reject the assumptions that animal tests will provide useful information. And I think it is important to recognise that this does represent a challenge. Moving beyond animal use, it isn't just a technical shift. It involves cultural change within research communities, support to transition away to new ways of doing science. And that means changing norms, producing new incentives, providing training, and tackling assumptions and attitudes towards what has in the past been considered good science. But crucially, it isn't about restricting what researchers can do, but about improving science so that it's more ethical, more robust, and more relevant. So if our goal is to understand and treat human disease, the science increasingly tells us we need models that are based on human biology and not attempts to extrapolate across species boundaries. So my key message here, ending animal testing is not just about new tools, it's about better science. So now we can talk a bit about the policy context and how we can influence and change the status quo. And I'll talk about what PeTA is doing in this area. So PeTA's response to this, in light of all the issues that I've just described, is to use our scientific expertise to produce a comprehensive review of the evidence on animal experimentation. And the research modernisation deal that is pictured on the slide, that's PeTA's reply to the systemic failures that we've just been looking at. So this forms the basis of a practical 6-point plan designed to transition away from animal testing towards modern, relevant and reliable science. And you can find the research modernisation deal on our website if you're interested in learning more about the technicalities and the specific issues with specific forms of testing and specific areas of research. And we spent several years promoting the research modernisation deal with government officials and parliamentarians, urging them to use it to create a government-led roadmap to end experiments on animals. And alongside our work on the forced swim test, which I mentioned earlier, I've cited the government roadmap as a recent campaign win, following on from our research modernisation deal work. Because in November last year, we did have some really, really good news. The government finally published its strategy to phase out the use of animals in science in all but exceptional circumstances. And it's actually the first strategy in the world to include all forms of animal testing. So that's good. That is a big win. And as I mentioned earlier, our work urging the government to develop this strategy began a really long time before it was published. So prior to the 2024 general election in the UK, we urged all political parties, not just the Labour Party, to commit to developing a nationwide roadmap for phasing out all animal experiments. And we're really happy when the Labour Party did commit to this, and then after being elected, announced the development of the roadmap at the end of 2024. So behind the scenes, we shared our research modernisation deal with officials involved in developing the roadmap. Our head of science policy attended a roundtable meeting with Lord Valence, who was developing the roadmap. And she also reviewed an early draft of the document and provided some feedback from an animal-free science perspective. As I said, it's a really amazing win to get a strategy of this nature. It is a big deal, but at the same time, it is currently just words on paper. And now the roadmap has been published, our focus has shifted to implementation and accountability. So, for example, one of my jobs early this year was to organise an event in Parliament, so a parliamentary reception in February this year, to maintain momentum and ensure that MPs and Lords understood both the opportunities and the challenges involved in transitioning to non-animal methods. And that event was very successful. We had lots of speakers from academia, industry, entertainment. We had attendees from all the major political parties. So there is a lot of attention on this topic at the moment, which we're obviously very happy about. And one of our requests is also for sepsis to be included as a research priority in the roadmap. And we're currently collecting signatures from politicians and scientists on an open letter to that effect. And another thing before I move on, another key part of our current advocacy is pushing for animal protection organisations to be formally included in the roadmap implementation. I think that is really, really important, that organisations that have the interests of animals at the forefront of their work, they need to be directly involved. For example, one of the new government committees, it's called the Alternative Methods Committee. We are arguing that we should be included on that committee, or that animal protection organisations need to be included in the membership of that committee, so that that diversity of expertise and voices that consistently challenge the status quo and keep ethical considerations at the forefront are right at the cutting edge of roadmap implementation. So I'll end by just saying a few words about routes into working in animal advocacy, because that's one of the things that I get asked a lot. And I want to say there isn't there isn't one single pathway. At PeTA alone, there are people working in all sorts of areas. So in campaigning, fundraising, marketing, policy, science, communications. Some people come from scientific backgrounds, as I've said, others from law or ethics, politics or creative roles. And all of those skills are very valued and needed in the work that we do. And there are other options that people have for, volunteering with animal charities. That's another really important way of contributing, that can demonstrate commitment to the issues. And that might involve hands-on practical work with animals at sanctuaries, animal care or charity shop work or public outreach. Those are all things that people do before working in PeTA. And more broadly than that, whatever your interests, there are always ways of helping animals, whether that's through the work that you do or the causes you support, consumer choices that you make. And I flagged up on the slide our PeTA US cruelty-free list, which is sort of helpful when shopping for products, and our vegan starter kits that we send out as well. And on my final slide here, I've just added some useful QR codes that people can use if they want to support our work. So that might be by taking part in PeTA actions. We're always looking for people to take part in actions and demonstrations, or by signing our open letter calling for animal protection organisations like PeTA to be involved in the implementation, as I just mentioned. And we also have a link up here to an alert enabling supporters to ask their MPs to sign the open letter calling for sepsis to be included in the strategy. And of course, anyone can get in touch with me if they have questions or if they'd like some information about animal testing or working in the field. And I've just added my contact details to the slide here. And that's it. Thank you very much for having me. It's been nice getting to talk to you, and yeah, happy to answer any questions or go into more detail on any of those areas that I've covered.
Thank you very, very much. That was incredibly insightful, very in-depth, and very enlightening. If you would like, there are a couple of questions in the chat already.
Oh.
I'll read through these, and then if anybody else wants to add more questions to the chat, they can do, or alternatively, you can unmute yourself and ask a question in person. So the first question is from Lisa. Animals are often denied painkillers so as not to affect the results of tests. But do you agree that the stress the animals feel also affects the results of the tests and would make those results invalid?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think I touched on that a little bit in the when thinking about the environments that animals live in themselves. That also is something that affects how animals respond to tests and research approaches. That's a really good point. And yeah, it's a good observation. I think it's another issue for the confounding elements of research using animals, not even demonstrating reliable information about animal physiology itself, let alone human physiological responses. So yeah, that's a good point.
Do you want to remove your slide now? If that's...
I can, yes. That's still up. Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
Stop share. Okay.
That's better. I can see you better now.
Okay.
Okay, so the follow-up next question is, there's lots of talk of Britain leading the way in new human relevant technologies. Do you think this is a true reflection of the situation, or is the US driving the transition away from animal methods?
I think that's a good question. I'm not sure really relative comparing the US and the UK, but there are some really good researchers working in the UK at the moment. I don't know if you know, like Queen Mary has a whole centre, really huge centre set up for, they don't call it non-animal methods. I think they call it I don't want to say the wrong thing, but they have a specific centre. It's Queen Mary University of London. They have lots of researchers working specifically on this area, quite high profile people. And Exeter as well has a big centre specifically focusing on non-animal methods as well. So I think we do have good expertise, and the life sciences in general is an area that the government likes to get behind. So I think that's at least the way that they're talking about it, is that like trying to get some impetus and momentum around non-animal methods and animal-free science as something that the UK can kind of embrace and try and lead on. But it is a good question, I think, to think about, you know, where exactly this expertise is kind of mainly focused. And I'm not sure it's the answer to that.
Is it new alternative methodologies? Is that what you were looking for? Is that what they call it?
I think it's called something like predictive. I'll look it up. There are people. Hazel Screen is one of the prominent researchers there. She's quite well known. She's also on the Animals in Science Committee, and she's she's doing a lot of work in that field and overseeing quite an array of different work of that nature.
Are you ready for the next question?
Yes, yeah.
What do you think of the Precision Breeding Act, which is threatening to take some genetically altered animals out of ASPA and place them under the new Act?
That is something that I don't actually know very much about, in fact. So the Precision Breeding Act is something that my knowledge of it is fairly limited. My understanding is this is something that has come about as a result of Britain leaving the EU, I think, and it actually is more relevant to the work that I did when I was at Nuffield, looking at the use of genetic techniques for influencing the genomes of animals used in farming systems. So I know more about it probably from that point of view, but I don't know very much about this in particular. So you're saying that there's an issue with potentially animals being not covered by ASPA underneath a new act.
Yeah.
Is a person who asked that? Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, it's Deborah. I was just going to say the same thing. Did you want to put your mic on, Deborah, and elaborate?
I did this research a little while ago. At the moment, the Act covers plants and animals, and most of the work has been done on plants. But in this year now, starting from this year, they're looking at animals. And they've just stated this obliquely, not in the Act itself, because I looked at it, but in sort of correspondence going back and forth, that if they meet certain requirements, animals won't need to be under ASPA. And for lab animals, that might not make a huge difference, but there are farm animals which come under ASPA, and so they'll be taken out of a controlled laboratory and put with the herd. And, you know, there's all sorts of implications. It's just, to me, it's a worrying situation, I think.
Well, thank you for raising it. It's worth looking into. My understanding of ASPA is that animals, there are certain animals and species of animals that are named as protected under ASPA, and there are also, you know, there are already gaps in ASPA. So you're probably aware decapod crustaceans are not currently covered by ASPA, and there's a movement to get them covered by ASPA, in spite of the fact that those animals, that species, is recognised as sentient but isn't covered by ASPA currently. And I think what you're saying is that there are concerns that the Precision Breeding Act might perhaps change the status of some species of animals such that that they are no longer covered by ASPA. Well, I'll take that away and look into it. But yeah, thank you for raising that, Deborah.
Penny in the RSPCA has written a little bit about that.
Okay.
Yeah, well, when I say this, I was worried when I read it, but you don't hear much about it. I did sort of make some initial inquiries, and yeah, it hasn't gone very far, at least people aren't aware of the situation. But that, to me, that is a concern, because ASPA is there to protect animals, in inverted commas. So they take that protection away.
Yeah, you're quite right. Yeah, that would be a concern if changing the genomes of animals such that they were no longer counted as the species that were protected by ASPA, that would be a horrible, ironic sort of loophole, or just you'd like to think an unintended consequence, but possibly not. Would certainly be a big concern. So thank you for raising that. I will look that up.
Okay, thank you.
Is there anybody else would like to posit any questions? We have a couple of questions ourselves. If there is anybody that would like to ask anything in particular, feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I think you've done such a good job, Anna, that
I hope it wasn't too sort of technical, or it's quite involved. I was hoping to try and arm you with some information that you could use. If
I think you've done that.
Debate.
I think you've done that incredibly well. Actually, there's a lot of good information in there, and stuff too that we can go back and look at again as well.
Yeah, it was perfect. Thank you, Anna. So yeah, on that note, there was just a couple of things. I don't know whether you know them off the top of your head, but it was actually things that you said that I didn't quite. I'm making notes so that I can remember to say them to people on the street and so on. So yeah, you shared the information about the stroke and the situation with the testing that's been going on around medication for stroke. Do you know those figures off the top of your head? Because I didn't quite get them down. You said it affects 900,000 people.
Yeah, I think these are
At a cost of £7 billion.
Yeah, sorry, perhaps I didn't include these in my slide, but yeah, so stroke is, as I'm sure you know, affects a lot of people. I think I said it was 900,000 people.
900,000 people. I think you said a cost of £7 billion.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's right. the testing or.
Yes, and then I said there are 1,000 experimental treatments that have been developed aimed at protecting brain cells. So, these are experimental treatments that have been tried out, and none of these have worked effectively at protecting brain cells in acute stroke patients.
Cool, right, thank you. Not very cool, but so yeah, 1,000 of them work in rodents and none of them work in humans. That's what you said, yeah?
Yeah.
And then sepsis, you said there's 150 drugs that work in rodents, none in humans. You said 240,000 people a year are affected by it. How many did you say die?
My figures, I think it's 48,000, which is a really high number. I always find that a bit shocking, because I don't think people are as worried about sepsis as perhaps they should be.
When you go in hospital, they're clear, there's big signs everywhere when you work in a hospital about the risks of it and so on. And you said that's more than the total of breast, bowel and
prostate cancer combined. Yeah. So it's really dangerous. It's obviously a big problem that there aren't any targeted treatments. It's not to say that there is nothing that a doctor can do for you if you have sepsis, but there are no targeted treatment. The research that has been developed using animals to develop specific targeted treatments for sepsis, we don't have any at all.
Right. Okay, thank you very much for that. And any other thing I wanted to ask you. So you seem really quite positive about the roadmap, the UK roadmap, and I'm wondering whether you've got any thoughts on why they might be criminalising protest against animal testing facilities, if they're really serious about such a thing.
It's a very good point, and there is a tension there that has been noted by many people. I don't know if you're aware, there was a debate in Parliament yesterday, and one of the MPs, I think he's a Conservative MP, was really quite candid about calling out that tension. And Irene Campbell, who was leading the debate, has also drawn attention to that, and, you know, made some suggestions about the possible financial and economic factors that might be involved in that. The roadmap, I don't know. I think we have to wait and see. And I think it's right to be suspicious. I mean, I say wait and see. We can't just wait and see. We have to keep putting on pressure, and we have to keep fighting. There have been strategies in the past. So in 2014, the then coalition government, I think, published a document that was purporting to end animal testing as well. I can't remember exactly how it was phrased. I think it wasn't as ambitious and large scale, but that was largely forgotten and dropped. And that's the risk, is that there is a risk that governments publish, you know, a strategy, some big paper, make some announcement, and then they get all the kind of positive attention and praise, and then it doesn't actually materialize, or it's very slow. And so there's still lots of work to do. It's certainly not the situation where, oh, we've got a roadmap now and we don't need to worry. It's definitely not that, partly because of some of the things that I was saying in my talk. There are some areas that are more straightforward than others, where it's about sort of funding and, you know, researching one-for-one replacements. And there are other areas in basic research where it really is, you know, battling mindsets and, you know, attitudes towards what scientists think of as good research. So it's not going to happen on its own. It won't happen just because the government has published this strategy. We need to make sure that we maintain pressure, that the right expertise is fed in. And PeTA is doing. We at PeTA are working at the moment on, you know, ideas like exploring options to support the government. You know, it's partly criticising where that is appropriate, and I think the thing around the Public Order Act is quite alarming, and it's good that has been pointed out. But there are also, we hope, ways to, you know, things to suggest to the government, or different options that they might have for like accelerating progress on it as well. But I do agree with you, and it's very concerning.
Thank you for those thoughts. What would you say is the best thing? I know obviously you've put some suggestions at the end of your talk. What do you think we should all be doing now to keep the pressure on?
I feel like I found it really encouraging yesterday. The number of MPs that were talking about the issue. It certainly doesn't feel to me that the roadmap's been published and now people have lost interest. So I think people need to keep doing all the things that we have been doing up to the point where we've got the roadmap. So I think people still need to be doing outreach. We still need to write letters. Obviously at PeTA we would love it if people supported our demonstrations, or, you know, signed our petitions. We often ask our supporters to write to their MPs and ask their MPs to do stuff, and I think that is a really valuable and effective way of maintaining public scrutiny on this issue. And for us at PeTA as well, a big part of what we're thinking about is trying to make sure that there is some longevity in the roadmap, and it isn't just a Labour Party issue. You know, we want all politicians to accept and sign up to this. We want to almost depoliticize it and make it, make people understand that this is the future of science, and it doesn't really matter what your political background is. We should all get on board with the mission to make animal-free science real.
I know that there's lots of aspects to this. How important do you think the role of universities are or is?
That's a really good question, because, you know, lots of research using animals is done at universities. It's over 50%. It's not just huge companies, you know, that are doing toxicity testing. Universities that's one of those hard nuts to crack type situation that I was talking about before. And so I can tell you a bit about initiatives that my colleagues in other PeTA entities, we call them. So there's a PeTA Netherlands. I have a colleague who is working with universities, specific universities, to develop their own local roadmaps. So like individual roadmaps for universities to look at their own research funding and research programs and think about how they specifically will move away from animal testing over time. And that is a challenge, but it's an important area that needs to be focused on. It will look different for different individual universities depending on what they're doing, but they are a key part of the picture, and they need to be thought about. And I don't know if anyone's read the roadmap. It's quite dry. It's not necessarily the kind of thing, if you're an activist, you would love to read from beginning to end. But the government is thinking about basic research. They have made some suggestions for things that might help with research that goes on in universities, issues around funding. So UKRI is the organisation that funds a lot of research in universities. They've said that they will expect UKRI to fund less animal research and put more money into non-animal research. They've also talked about doing workshops with publishers who, publishers are the ones that, they publish research that's done, and often that's a huge incentive for researchers. So researchers in universities need to believe that if they do work that doesn't involve animals, then it will get published. Or if they write a proposal for a grant application for work that doesn't involve animals, they need to believe that that could get funded, and this is a very competitive environment. So I think the government has some levers there to support. It's not just to do with the university itself, it's to do with the broader ecosystem, I think.
Yeah, that's good. Excuse me. Yeah, it's good, because I think, for me, I think that the universities are quite important. Not only does 52% of the testing happen at laboratory, happen on universities' campuses, but also they are the future technicians. They are the people that are going to be paving the way for the next generation. So I think, for me, it feels like it's very important to get these initiatives into universities now.
I agree with you, and that's the thing around training like younger researchers, which I think, my understanding is that's a big part of what my colleague in the Netherlands is doing, looking at different more training and more support, and people championing non-animal methods in universities at the more junior level, so that it kind of filters upwards, kind of thing.
Do PeTA UK have any plans to do something similar here? Are you waiting to see how it goes there, or what's the?
We're at the moment we're thinking about all the different options that we might want to do. There's so much stuff in the roadmap, but we are thinking about how we might be able to leverage that, or encourage universities to do that more, or support the government to encourage universities to do that. So yeah, we are thinking about it.
Thank you.
Are there any other inroads that you think are particularly important? I know there's a vast array, and all roads lead to Rome, so to speak.
We're at the moment we're trying to think about the situation in the round. We're thinking a lot, as you said, university basic research. We feel that is one of the areas that is not really adequately dealt with in the roadmap, and that is because it's a hard problem. So we think that needs a lot more attention, a lot more thinking, a lot more effort. It's good that the government has included this area of research in the roadmap, because the US has published a roadmap to end regulatory testing. The EU is about to publish, we hope, very soon, has been developing a roadmap to end regulatory testing in the EU. But the UK's roadmap is the first one to, purport at least to end all forms of testing. And that is an important statement. But they need to do a lot more thinking and put a lot more kind of energy and initiatives and effort into thinking about basic research. And that's what we're going to be working on over the next kind of few months. So yeah, watch this space is maybe what I would say about
that. Is there anything anybody else would like to add to this conversation? I think very much that everything that has been discussed so far, there's a lot of information, and there's a wide array. So I think I'm just thinking about the lack of questions, I think, is due to the fact that there is or I think most of the questions have already been preemptively answered.
Yeah, I feel a lack of questions. I feel like I've had quite a lot of questions.
Sorry.
I'm exhausted. I've got a brain drain now, but yeah,
Oh, well, that's good then.
Yeah, I hope it wasn't too much information. I know it was a bit quite involved, but yeah, hopefully, as I said, I'm very happy to be contacted. And if people want any information about animal testing, I mean, there's a lot of information on our website, but we do engage with supporters sometimes, especially if sometimes somebody will write to us and say, oh, I'm going to meet my MP. I've got a meeting with my MP. And is there any information you can give me? And yeah, we're happy to engage more and just support anybody that wants to advocate for an end to animal testing and all animal exploitation. So yeah, I'm happy to answer anything later over email or yeah, if people want to do that, it's fine.
Fantastic. And obviously this is being recorded now, so this will be available on our YouTube channel. So and will be available for everybody to rewatch and pick up more information that if it passed them by on the first sweep, so to speak. With that, I'm going to thank you very much for your time and let you go.
Thank you. Well, yeah, thank you for having me, and it's lovely to see you all. Yeah, really great to get to talk to people about this important topic. So yeah, have a lovely evening all.
There's lots of thanks in the chat. Thank you very, very much. Wonderful to have you talking with us. A great honour, I would say. So thank you once again for indulging us, Anna, and thank you very, very much to everybody else that's managed to join us either tonight or throughout this series of events. So I will love you all and leave you. Thank you very much for coming, and bye.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.